And what was a lopsided 123-107 loss for the Indiana Pacers? Tyrese Haliburton couldn't find space to be effective as a driver. And in the reverse, Pascal Siakam had to drive in order to effectively find space. Meanwhile, just as Oklahoma City narrowed the court on defense, congregating here, there, and everywhere, the Thunder also elongated the court on offense, furling out a longer runway for the league's MVP, while also actively transforming obstacles into opportunities, both with regard to their own star as well as the stars of the opposition. Joining me to discuss what led to the Pacers constantly fighting an uphill battle in Game 2 and whether, for two teams from the Plain States, they can find smoother terrain back home in Indiana. Once again, my longtime co-host, my favorite basketball talker, my favorite basketball writer, Samson Folk.
So I think the Thunder seemed kind of like what they think the young kids take the road to school. It's like all downhill. And the Pacers had the, it's uphill both ways across mountainous terrain, whatever. Uh, Before we get into the specifics, broad strokes, a lot of really clever adjustments from the Thunder. They won 68 games. And just as this is how I ended, for any Pacers fans who are listening, Steve Nash had that great quote where he's like, when you win in the playoffs, you feel like you'll never lose again. And when you lose, you feel like you'll never win again. And it does feel that way. But at the end of the short trip to Oklahoma City, they're 1-1. That's great news. They have lots to correct going into Game 3. But this is a team that self-corrects quite often. And we can dive into it. Excited. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe early on. This is the first we ever done that. It helps out the channel. So thank you, everybody, for joining us.
I've been very remiss in asking people to do literally anything while we've been doing this podcast.
That's my job. You brought me on as kind of like I'm the soupy salesman. I'm like, hey, you want to subscribe to a Patreon?
I think the best place to start is probably with the person that had the most talking points from this game afterward. Tyrese Haliburton finishes 7 of 13 from the field with 17 points, but 12 of those points came in the fourth quarter when the game was pretty well out of hand at that point. More telling, the Pacers scored 0.22 points per chance on 13.4 drives per 100 possessions. To put that into context for everyone, that would be the third worst driving game of the season for him, behind two games that still stand out in my memory quite vividly when the Pacers played on the road in Houston and how out of sync he was changing ends of the floor. Lots of things that made you go, this person doesn't look like 100% themselves. And then also when they were on the road in Portland and Toumani Camara was honestly just like awesome defensively against him in that game. This is worse to only those two basketball games. So what do you think caused Tyrese to have so many problems in this, in addition to just, the plain fact that Oklahoma City packs the paint more than anybody and driving lanes aren't probably going to be readily available in the same way that they were in the prior matchups that the Pacers have had in the playoffs?
Well, those are besides that, it's just that Tyrese, this isn't the strength of his game. We've talked about his great counters and how he's managed to overcome a lot of things in this playoff run. He's been tremendous, I think. But as you know, getting into this playoff series, we know this was going to be a significant challenge. We did a podcast 3 years ago where we talked about like, how does Tyrese beat the perimeter? What does it look like given, his athletic traits and his handle and this kind of stuff? And we talked about like pinging the ball back and forth, like boomeranging and attacking switch pockets and stuff like that. But the Thunder do not allow a ton of that stuff. So they're focusing all of their incredible intention and intensity and tenacity on a relative weakness of Tyrese's game. And we're seeing the outcome of that. The Pacers have to be really intentional about how they try to set him loose and about how they structure the offense in trying to, utilize his passing and his ability to read the game.
So some of the stuff that they tried, and I think this very first possession, although it does come from the second half, is probably most telling of OKC's overall defense, in that Tyrese is screening for TJ while he's being guarded by Caruso. The Thunder don't switch it. There's a lot, and you mentioned this in the piece that you wrote. You mentioned it before we hopped on here. There's a lot of east-west in the Pacers offense against this OKC defense. There, Tyrese tried to reject. He has the entire left side of the floor to himself, and Caruso still managed to stay in front of him and stay in front of the reject. So then he ends up going off the screen from Obi Toppin. And now watch the Thunder defense as he gets 1 foot in the paint. All 5 defenders from Oklahoma City, not a single soul cares about TJ McConnell over in that weak side corner. And Shea ends up stripping it on his somewhat high gather there. So the Pacers throughout this game, like this is an action that they really like, and I wrote about it during All-Star weekend to kind of push back against the idea that NBA teams don't use off-ball screening actions anymore. Other than Tyler Hero during the regular season, at the point in time when I wrote that, Tyrese had come off more flare screens than anybody in the NBA. He likes to pass off to the wing, and then they'll fade him to his dominant right off the flare. And at the same time, if I run that back slightly just so people can get a look at it, you'll notice that Andrew's cutting through to create that wider gap for Tyrese on the catch. That's intended to be creating a driving lane for Tyrese. Lou Dort was very good chasing through those, and then it's turning into, a step back to his left rather than a downhill attack.
The Thunder, they're quicker than every other team. We've watched a lot of Pacers by now. We've watched a lot of teams try to catch up to Tyrese in space, pump fake, reset. The Thunder are quicker to that. They're quicker to recover out of that, and they're quicker to attack it downhill. This defense is just quicker than everything else the Pacers have seen.
And it's also a push and pull because you have to keep working. You have to keep connecting one thing to the next. And while we talked about in the last podcast, like quicker shots is better, in terms of actually manufacturing driving lanes for Tyrese, it gets difficult because the word that you use to title your piece, constricted, is like watching a boa constrictor. So you have to go from, they like using triggers to, as I said, so that there's more flow between what they're doing. But the more actions you add, it's almost like they pack in and take stuff away even more. But this isn't a one and done play, this 5-out flare set. So you're seeing again that Nesmith's cutting through and they're trying to get Tyrese off of that flare on the catch to get a driving lane. There's no driving lane there. They'll go into an automatic ball screen. And when they do, typically Nembhard drops down into the short corner and sets a lock screen to create a little bit more space. That doesn't actually happen, and it's a moving screen from Miles anyways. But just to give people a progression of how normally this works and where they would go from there, and perhaps why I think there might be, when they get back to Indiana, hopefully they can get back to getting through more options throughout that set to get him rolling, is like here he's catching it, Andrew's cutting the flare, Tyrese makes that pass, and like you said, the Thunder much quicker than the Phoenix Suns. But here, this game when Tyrese had one of his worst driving games of the year up in Portland, you'll see the screen and then you'll watch Andrew. He's cutting down to create more driving space, room for Tyrese to at least get a foot in the paint and make that pass to Miles. The one that I like the most is when they were in LA on that road trip. You'll see Pascal cutting on the flare from Tyrese, and then Tyrese gets off the ball. They go into split action with Ben, reject the split action. Now it's a get with Miles so that he can get a headed steam going into the ball screen. And then as the ball moves towards the full side of the court, Andrew drops down again. And now, with how much the Thunder like to help off of the corners, you're getting a very clean catch-and-shoot three-point attempt from Benedict Mathurin. So before we kind of jump ahead to the fourth quarter, do you like them having to potentially play deeper into the clock if it means that they're getting those types of options there in order for Tyrese to be playing more paint to great than what was the case in this game? And then secondly, after that, before we look at the fourth quarter, what were your thoughts about the fourth quarter? He did have 12 points in the fourth, and he did go 5 of 6 from the field.
Yeah. I mean, there's a little bit like just using him off ball and getting him into space, which was good in the fourth quarter. He took 2 very aggressive mid-range jumpers that went in, one like that big long floater, the other just like a straight pull. He needs to be aggressive. I know it's kind of like it's that confirmation bias or looking back after it's gone in, but if that stuff doesn't go in earlier in the game, people are probably a little bit pissed. They're like, okay, these are bad shots. We can work for something better. But largely, I think the Thunder, at least in that game, they did checkmate the process that the Pacers were doing offensively, because they moved Pascal above the break to initiate, and Pascal basically, like, I tweeted it out, there's that video of Tyrese mic'd up telling Pascal, like, keep sealing, and Pascal said, I'm trying, bro, and Tyrese said, just keep doing it, like, I'll get you the ball. Pascal did not get the ball from that point. Like, he did not get seal, easy touch, anything like that. He had to initiate from above the break against guys like Jalen Williams and Alex Caruso, who are putting hands on you. And then if you take that gather through them, the rotation comes really quick. And Pascal is not Tyrese Haliburton when it comes to passing on the move. And even Tyrese had however many turnovers last night, 5. It's just, and they, as I wrote about, as you just talked about, moving so much of the offense horizontally and moving so much of the offense back into the hands of Miles Turner, who's popping against, it's the safest look against this Thunder defense. The Thunder accomplished all of that stuff. Tyrese's worst driving game, removed Pascal from the post, funneled all of the shots and a ton of the actions into Miles Turner's hands. That's fine, but that's not going to win you the finals probably. The Pacers do have to probe further or be more inventive in what they're showing at the start to create better looks. They need a solve.
It was almost like the frenzy that OKC creates was causing the Pacers to play a little bit frenzied. Like, you need to trust in the options that are baked into the sets that you're already running and be willing to go deeper into what you're doing. Because, like, I like that flare action. I think it makes sense based on how OKC schemes their coverage. But you never once got into the space where Andrew's going to cut down so that Tyrese can get deeper. You never got into the fake split action. You never got into the reversal where they could have attacked that corner pin and screen. It never happened because people were getting, for lack of a better term, they were getting somewhat antsy at the beginning of the actions and just looking for what that they could get. I found the fourth quarter somewhat meaningful. Obviously, OKC had taken their foot off the gas a little bit, but just like running the full court blind pig with Tyrese off and letting him get ahead of steam into the catch. And then also just the more you can do with get actions and handoffs to play him into space with that back screen, which kind of reminds me of that play I talked about with Wemby in Paris, where you can toy with Chet's center of gravity there to get Tyrese lower down the floor. That's not the best defensive execution from the Pacers, but they weren't looking at a lot of those handoffs leading into the ball screens between Tyrese and Miles in the first half, like what they got to in the fourth quarter. So at the very least, hopefully that's something that they can bookmark headed into game 3.
And that's like a lot of times what you and I talk about is the structure of things and when players do perform well. And we don't typically zero in on when players, it's just like, no, you have to win that matchup. You have to. We did a little bit with Pascal against Cat, and he did for game 6, right? But typically we're looking for solves elsewhere other than just like be better. And actually, like, that makes sense for how we do it. But in some sense, there is, like, as you said, the Thunder are dictating. You have the ball. Offenses can be great. You can dictate a little bit more of this with your skills on ball, whether it's Tyrese, whether it's Pascal, whether it's being able to motivate things for your offense against this defense rather than just allowing it to dictate going back the other way.
Because the other thing is why I thought the Thunder played a very smart game on both ends of the floor. And over and over again, while I'm not going to talk through all of this, I think part of the other reason why Tyrese might not have gotten as many paint touches and had his drives be quite as effective in this game, in addition to how much the Thunder, like I said, were shrinking the floor, is how often they were having the big set ram screens for him into guard-to-guard screening actions. He was having to navigate about 1 million pin downs in this game into the guard screens. And sometimes, like, the quality of the defense wasn't always bad. Like right here between him and Andrew, this is mostly fine. Like, it's a hedge. They strung out the dribble from Shea there. Nembhard gets back in the passing lane. It was more just the action of, like, what we talked about with Brunson and sometimes Donovan Mitchell in the prior 2 series. It was more so just that he was having to do it. Like, climbing over a pin down over and over again from Isaiah Hartenstein in the paint and then having to go up and potentially show or whatever coverage they're going to use because, like, let's be honest, it becomes harder for him to show when he's having to climb the ram screen because it's making him late to the point of the next screen at the top of the key. Like, that's the whole point in doing it. In addition to having him exert energy to get around it, it makes it harder for him to jump out above the level. So then sometimes it was drop coverage from him. Sometimes it was switches from him. Here, like, if you're going to get split, he needed to go back to Isaiah Joe. Instead, he peeled off to the perimeter, and then nobody finds that hole. Like, you could see some fatigue setting in there based on what those things were, where I don't know why Oklahoma City would go away from that action. The Pacers didn't really provide any reason for them to. So something that I noticed, this is against Brooklyn. I think one of Tyrese's strengths generally is that he's very self-aware as a defender. So, like, when the Pacers played the Nets were running a bunch of gut Chicago actions for Cam Johnson coming up from the block off of a pin down into a handoff at the top of the key. And this was like, I'd never seen somebody pre-switch out of gut Chicago where Tyrese was just like, I'll just hand Cam Johnson off to Andrew Nemhart and go to the corner. I think that there's probably some possibilities for him to do some of that when they're running, like, just so people know, a ram screen is an off-ball screen followed by a ball screen. It's to make that player late going up to the ball screen. I think when he sees that pin down coming, there might be some opportunities to pre-switch him with the player in the corner so that he's not the person chasing up to the ball that perhaps they weren't prepared for because they didn't go to that a lot in game one.
Just speaking of execution as well, you and I had the conversation, and then you looked it up when we were talking about how like a wide pin doesn't work in the playoffs. I can't remember exactly the play, but I'm pretty sure OKC scored on a wide pin in game 2. And to me, that really just is like, damn, they're getting what they want. Like, because a wide pin typically doesn't in the playoffs against that type of coverage, intensity, and intention does not satisfy the types of advantages you need. But the Pacers, man, they got screened a lot. And, you know, the Thunder were screening the right guys. And just to credit Shea, I thought Shea was pretty masterful in reading the floor, and especially after a game wherein passing was such a hyper-focused weakness for the Thunder. I thought that they were far better in the past game or in game 2.
Yeah, we'll get into some of their offensive tweaks toward the back end, but like just with regards to this with Tyrese, like if they're going to be putting him in to action this often, and like I said, whether you want to call it the ram screen or the pin down that's leading into that guard to guard, like if they can't creatively find ways to pre-switch him out of it, then their other option, which they attempted to go to very briefly in the third quarter, is trying to mix in more of the zone. They got beat at the top of the zone a couple times, but like having Tyrese in the lower corner means he's not going to be chasing and navigating through those actions. They didn't play very many possessions of this, but like generally, what are your thoughts? Are you thinking that Tyrese is just going to have to hang in on those actions? Would you like to see them play more zone? You think they find some creative wrinkle against that, or is it just like
I liked the zone when I saw it. And now I don't know what the points per possession came out, but
it wasn't enough possessions to really.
Yeah. Was it 3? 3 maybe?
Yeah.
4? Yeah, so a little bit of zone, as it were.
A little bit, yeah.
I liked the zone. I like seeing it. You and I have talked about in the past keeping Tyrese in the corner. It takes sometimes what can be a weakness for him defensively, and I think he can be strong in that bottom corner, and he can actually like help a lot. And it's about sequencing. Like the game really at this high a level is about sequencing, and you can't rule out anything really. I mean, Aaron Wiggins hit 2 step back threes. You know, Alex Caruso scored 20 points, and cutting, you know, this will sound a little bit like too much like NBA draft Twitter, but how Caruso sequences the cut versus the cut and fill versus the space, he managed to sequence everything properly last game. And the Pacers, it's about how they sequence what they throw at the Thunder. And that so much of that is on the coach and what that looks like. And I think Rick has been very good at that. We saw a lot of stuff last night that didn't work out for the Pacers and, you know, worked really well for the Thunder. And that's a credit to the Thunder. But man, I liked the zone. I think there's a place for it in this series. And I feel even more so that way after seeing it for a few possessions last night.
The other star for the Pacers, Pascal Siakam, didn't have anything really particularly coming easy for him either. You mentioned some of this, but I'll let you do, 20,000 foot view on Pascal Siakam in this game.
Yeah, it's the biggest. I talked about the interaction he had with Tyrese. The biggest problem in this past game is one that has cropped up before, I think, is where, sometimes you can point to Pascal and be like, no, this is a little bit too passive. We need you a little bit more involved. However, I do think in game 2, largely at the feet of TJ and those minutes is just like ignoring the advantage in the star on the floor to pursue other things. And some of that is attached to playing quick. You're never more open than, when you're first open, like all that kind of stuff. But they just ignored the the chances they had to kind of use Pascal to try and mine advantages. So that was a big problem. And the Pacers had to get Pascal touches. It was at the end of the second quarter, right? They started just giving him the ball above the break, and he split J-Dub and Chet for an end one. He got to the free throw line quite a few times. He was actually 8 of 9, which was a welcome change from his typical free throw shooting woes. He attacked and got Nesmith a corner three. Like, they worked through him it was almost a 10-0 run just based off of what he was able to do. But that's not sustainable. Like, it was a great run of play from Siakam, but we saw, like, you can't drive against the Thunder. Like, Anthony Edwards can't do it. Pascal Siakam certainly can't just drive from the top down against digs from, like, Alex Caruso is going to put two hands on you. You're going to be hand checked going down there. He's going to sweep and swat at everything you do. J-Dub is coming in rotation. Chet is coming in rotation. And if Pascal were an incredible on-the-move passer navigating the middle, like to the weak side and like beating the weak side zone, maybe then, but he's not. He's not that level of passer. So he's forcing up very difficult shots. Pascal was not put in like a single strong position except for when he got the touch on Shea and Shea pulled the chair on him. And it's like, damn, you wish Pascal would have taken advantage of that, but that was his one the whole game. And that's tough because when we talked about the advantages that Pascal has in this series, nobody, not even for a second, said, well, you can ISO him at the top against Caruso and J-Dub. It was like, no, you have to get him the ball in the post. And he just got 0 of that. Well, he got 1. Just a singular possession, which is not good.
And I almost, just to give more credit to Oklahoma City, I think that they're making those entries incredibly tough to get him the ball.
Yes.
Sometimes the purpose for the Pacers wasn't there, like just to throw two very telling numbers out there. He had 1 possession in the post. He logged 1 post up. And also, the Pacers were minus 16 in 23 minutes with Pascal on the floor without Tyrese. Like, where the ball was going in those minutes, the process was almost truly inexplicable for me. I can't fathom it, except for the fact that Oklahoma City altered their rotation. And because of what rotation was out there, they toyed with who was guarding who a little bit. And that makes me think that that's what led to the excesses of TJ Ball. But there were definitely excesses of TJ Ball going on in the first half. So this is what I noticed from the Siakam stuff. First of all, if he's being guarded by Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in the corner, and your star player, Tyrese Haliburton, in the other corner is like, hey, give that guy the ball. I'm thinking you should probably give him the ball. Not a terrible shot. Andrew can make a pull-up mid-ranger, but I would like to see Pascal Siakam get established in the post, even if Shai does pull the chair on him in the post, probably more than one time. Next point is Oklahoma City didn't start double big in the first game. You and I didn't really expect them to start double big in the first game. And I won't speak for you, but I don't think the reason they lost game 1 is because they didn't start double big. They didn't have problems getting out to a big lead and maintaining a lead in this game without starting double big, but they did mix in some double big minutes when Thomas Bryant was out on the court in the first half. And what was telling about that wasn't so much, to me, like something lineup specific. Pretty much all of OKC's lineups had an impact against the Pacers in this game.
Mm-hmm.
But rather the fact that when they were double big, neither of the bigs were guarding Pascal Siakam during any of these minutes. So Chet Holmgren always on Thomas Bryant, and they were doing everything they could to off-ball switch Isaiah Hartenstein onto Aaron Nesmith away from the ball, which meant that Pascal Siakam was either being guarded during this entire stretch by either Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or Isaiah Joe. And yet he was not touching the ball against that matchup. Like, just want to like draw a big red circle over like that's where the ball needs to go. Also, if Aaron's being guarded by Isaiah Hartenstein, and this was something that I pointed out clear back when the Pacers played OKC in March, that was the first team that I had seen try a center on a wing cross match against the Pacers. And I was like, that was somewhat effective. I could see why they did it. But then Aaron's basically been a flamethrower throughout the playoffs. It's like, I don't think another team's going to try that. Well, OKC tried it again, and pretty much he just stood in the corners when this happened. So it was allowing Isaiah Hartenstein to be pretty aggressive, putting at least 1 foot in the paint, as you can see him doing there. And so it just ended up being a lot of TJ either one pass attempts to what is a contested three there, or everything just being TJ and Thomas Bryant, which I can't really fathom, because here, like, Aaron's cutting through with Isaiah Hartenstein guarding him in the corner. Siakam again has Isaiah Joe directly to TJ's left. There is 17 seconds on the shot clock, Samson, and this is what shot they got. That was a real possession of basketball in the NBA Finals. Thomas Bryant shooting a contested three over Chet Holmgren. And that's not, like, this went on for quite some time. Like, this is towards the end of the first quarter. And again, like, TJ and Thomas Bryant are being guarded by Alex Caruso and Chet Holmgren. Siakam, Isaiah Joe above the break. Aaron Nesmith, Isaiah Hartenstein. Like, to me, Thomas Bryant should be in the strong side corner, defended by Chet Holmgren. Be putting Isaiah Hartenstein in space. Use Aaron as a ghost screener. Try to open up the normal 1-4 flat for TJ to go right into the gap. Or just have Siakam duck in against the mismatch. But it's more like, let's just switch between Caruso and Chet Holmgren, and it's a zero pass possession of, again, like, that's really the excesses of TJ ball. To the point where by the second quarter, you could tell they were, like, at this point, like, probably need to get Siakam a touch. So they call an ATO directly to get Siakam in the post. And this is where I will give Oklahoma City credit. They were pushing him off that spot and being very aggressive to try to front and take that away. So Andrew doesn't feel comfortable giving it to him until, like you said, he has to get a touch above the break and try to make something happen against Chet Holmgren. Like, a lot of the touches went from what would have been post-ups to him attempting to drive, and to his credit, punching through gaps and splitting coverages probably better than most of the guards on the roster in this game. But I have another thing to show there, but I will let you react to what we have seen.
J-Dub, second team all defense. Dort, first team all defense. I actually saw, I don't know if this is just like a Twitter belief, but a lot of people thought J-Dub could have been first team. And I probably agree. He's done a really good job on Pascal in the minutes that he's gotten, on the possessions he's gotten. That's gone more pro Thunder than I would have thought. And just highlighting that is, like, really important, because I do also want to, not just say, like, oh, the Pacers, but the Thunder, there's some really good possessions here. And J-Dub has been, he's met the moment of the bigger matchup there. He's done a really good job on Pascal. But Pascal's resilient. He has to be like resilient against J-Dub, of course. That drive where he splits he and Chet is great. He kept working it hard. But also, if it's Isaiah Joe, if it's Shea, it's inexcusable. And you can, like, Pascal had like a strained tone. He's like, I'm trying, bro. And not to keep, because these conversations happen all the time. This one happened to be mic'd up. But it's a good inflection point of, like, Pascal was available and could have had advantages, but a mid-range jumper over Chet Holmgren is not maybe the ideal outcome for offense. They have to sort that stuff out.
It reminds me a little bit of the Game 3 loss to the Knicks, and that Tom Thibodeau altered the rotation enough that some, like, just wild stuff was happening in the fourth quarter of that game, where, like, you're watching Tony Bradley guarding Karl Anthony Towns for reasons that aren't entirely clear, and at the other end of the floor, like, kind of missing where advantages were. In defense of the Pacers, they didn't play against the double big lineup, and they certainly didn't play against the double big lineup with one of the bigs guarding Aaron. So that's something they're going to have to go back and look at the film through, because to me, it should have either been involving Aaron as a screener far more to get Isaiah Hartenstein moving in space, or just making clear outs. If they're gonna toy around with it to the point, like what we just said, that it's Isaiah Joe and Shea just outright guarding Pascal, you're not even having to fight to get the switch that you want. Like, that is where the ball needed to go.
I would even say, like, the first action, to go back to your point, is like Nesmith just running off stuff and see how they track him and pull him. If he pulls a big up top, then you can work with Siakam, and then you can relocate Nesmith again to maybe one pass away from Siakam. If because the big is going to want to help, and that's an easy read for Siakam. And Nesmith is a flamethrower.
Yep.
Like, it's okay for the offense to be not TJ McConnell pull-ups or Thomas Bryant catch and shoot, but if you can work it so that it's like Nesmith catching comfortably, or Pascal getting single coverage on Isaiah Joe or Shea, like, the fact that the offense didn't shift to that was surprising. because Neesmith can be utilized more, and so can Pascal. And that's this Indiana offense when it's having trouble identifying things. Those guys can get lost in the shuffle for long periods of time.
I would like to hope that those types of cross matches wouldn't sow that much indecision after they've seen this when they get
Yeah.
back for game 3. I would like to think that it wouldn't end in
Well,
Thomas
they'll
Bryant shooting a
watch the
3 against
podcast.
Chet with 16 seconds left on the clock. I would like to think.
Chet
I
had
wasn't
a good game.
I wasn't done with the Siakam film yet. I just wanted to briefly pause. So, in defense of TJ, if it sounds like I've been a bit harsh to the TJ Ball concept, obviously TJ Ball has had some very high highs in these playoffs as well. I just think that it got a little bit muddied given what lineup the Thunder were playing. But also, like, just to reinforce too, if Siakam has a switch there, a mismatch against Case and Wallace, I don't think that you should drive Chet Holmgren with 4 Thunder players with 1 foot in the paint away from the mismatch either. I like some of these possessions broke my brain just a little bit, but this is the last one that I'm going to show. This is the play that I actually pointed out and said, like, watch for this. I think it could be effective for the Pacers when I was on with Zach Lowe, setting the C so that Siakam gets what matchup he wants, Miles above the break, and Tyrese specifically in that weak side corner with Aaron setting the flare to put tension on Lou Dort. Is he going to go help on the potential entry to Siakam, or is he going to stick with Tyrese Haliburton lifting up from the corner? I think this is still a very fruitful action, or could be very fruitful for the Pacers, but you have to make the correct read. The Thunder so far are choosing that they're going to go to Pascal Siakam because their normal scheme is to help off the corners as much as they do. It is to flock to the ball as much as they do. In that case, you got to be looking to the star in the opposite direction and knowing that's going to be a 2-on-1 between Aaron and Tyrese when Tyrese lifts the rest of the way. Instead, like, that's a very not a great read and also a pretty poor entry pass from the top of the key, which Miles has been good at throwing those, but that's off target given that what you just said there, like Siakam saying basically I'm trying, bro. That is Siakam, I'm trying, bro. Like that's him showing numbers and being prepared for the ball.
Can you go back really quick too, just
Yes,
for
I can.
a little,
You want it at the beginning?
Just when he's about to throw the pass is perfectly fine. Like this
go.
too is like, as the passer, you have to read where like the low man and read where like the guy who's on Pascal, where are the bodies? You cannot throw Pascal into the basket here. Like you can't lead him into this area because that's where the closest help is. And that's the side that his defender is shading him towards. You're throwing him into like an aerial contest against 2 other guys. Basically.
Into the snake pit, you might say.
Yes, into the snake pit. And this has happened on multiple occasions. And I understand why the Pacers might not have been attuned to it at the start of the series, because other teams don't attack these passes as directly. They can they can lead players to the basket. But against the Thunder, you can't. You have to take advantage of not the layup that's there, but you have to throw the ball to Pascal, make sure he gets it, and trust that the deep catch is a big enough advantage and that you can make lemonade out of the lemons that come with the 2-on-1 on the weak side that's going to come out of it with Neesmith and Haliburton, or just go to Haliburton. But the decision-making here and the execution of it is just not where it needs to be.
Yeah, just to reinforce, like this exact action and Miles feeding the ball to Siakam from outside above the break was one of the most efficient play types in the entirety of the playoffs last year. Yeah. I still like this framework, despite the fact that the Thunder guard it much differently. It just needed to be a different read. I think that this is still something they can pull from, and I think that's all. Everything you shared there is really good information. So, again, I mostly walk away from a lot of this giving a lot of credit to the Thunder, because even though some of this seems rather obvious, there were changes between game 1 and game 2 that the Pacers are now going to have to adapt to in the reverse. And that also applies to the offensive end of the floor, because like I said, the Thunder very much want to shrink space defensively, narrow the court width-wise defensively, and they were trying to elongate it as much as they could offensively. So Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, masterful game from him. The Pacers really weren't having any more success defensively than they were offensively necessarily. So what did you think about the Thunder's process at the other end of the floor?
Well, they made the Pacers guard higher up.
Yep.
This was a conversation I had with, Emmanuel quickly. This is a conversation I had with Darko quite a few times, talking about pickup points and how it can benefit the defense to pick up earlier, to inform what the offense is trying to do, but also how, picking up earlier can be of great benefit to the offense in the same way, in that it makes the other team guard a larger piece of the floor, especially it makes bigs more accountable for where rotations are coming off of on the weak side and all that space, and also kind of trying to pen in a ball handler over a wider area. It puts a lot of stress, and the Pacers are going to keep having, they have to have Pascal roam off of guys. That's what they do. They have to have that as a linchpin off of Caruso or Dort. They swap, like Caruso was extremely effective in game 2, Dort extremely effective in game 1. But I think that the sequencing, to use that term once again, of the Thunder's cuts, the timing I thought was really great. They included more in how they're tugging and pulling at where the Pacers wanted to help from, and they just opened up these great big chasms for shooters, and their shooters shot the ball really well in this game. And that's a huge swing in the offensive process. But it starts with, in my mind, a larger runway for the MVP, and the Pacers struggling to keep tabs on that, which is not, they can be faulted for it, but you have to remember, like, this is the MVP. It's tough. It's not going to be easy.
Definitely. I will say, for context of everything that we just said there and why I had the monologue written in the way that I did, this was the highest average distance from the hoop on ball screens for the Thunder of any game this season, not just the playoffs. Literally 29.192 feet was the average distance. So they definitely were trying to counter for the Pacers' pressure and also be allowing the Thunder to get a downhill head of steam. And also, that's kind of how they were toying with. If you go back to our prior podcast and look how we talked about the Pacers nexting a lot against Shea coming off of picks, it altered the Pacers' ability to do that as well. So I'll shine the clips up there so that we can get a better idea of what was going on. You can see a lot of logo pick and roll for Shea Gilgeous-Alexander in this game with Caruso. The Pacers had some problems when Caruso was at the 4 in this game in terms of their coverage. Obi actually does okay to get back there. I don't really know why Miles felt the need to step off of Isaiah Hartenstein when the ball was under control, but that led to playmaking from Hartenstein and Caruso making a 3, obviously. This one, a screen is being set on the letter K of the logo, literally the half court line, and Aaron is chasing over the top, which means Thomas Bryant has to absorb the ball, which means TJ is going to be heavily in sync to try to help Thomas Bryant, and then it's just a wide open spray and kick to Chet Holmgren for 3, who's going to be able to easily shoot over the top of TJ. So before I show some of the stuff against the nexting, I'm just going to bring up the obvious here and ask a question, which is, if the Thunder are going to set screens this high, can the Pacers duck under them?
This is our playoff preview. Not even the finals preview. This is the playoff preview against the Bucks. Can the Pacers go under the screen? I think my answer to it back then, a month and a half ago, was why not? And I feel the same way on this one. I understand there is an ethic of, work and grinding that really does help elevate this Pacers defense, that they want to go over stuff. But, maybe I would duck under on occasion. That might be something to do.
This is the most prolific driver in the NBA per 100 possessions. And I want to say, because there are times where I've questioned it, this arena is very, very, very loud. It's possible there were times where they were calling out screens and the on-ball defender literally wasn't hearing it, hence why they're getting smacked that high up the court. But if that's not the case, given the adjustments that the Thunder made, I think that they have to at least think about going under a few more of these, because they weren't keeping the ball out of the paint, and then it was leading to too many spray out 3s, which maybe in the next game, maybe the Thunder wouldn't make those, but I don't think that you want to leave it up to that much variance and be allowing him just to get ahead of steam that far away from the basket. And the Pacers did go under a lower percentage of screens per 100 in the NBA than literally any other team. And I understand why they did it, because their ball pressure, like you just said, is absolutely critical to the way that they want to guard. But they also did adapt. Like in game 1 against the Bucks, they weren't picking up Giannis at half court anymore. Pascal Siakam backed off and had his heels at the 3-point line, and that did help the overall efficacy of their defense. I think it could be similar here in game 3 if they decided, like, hey, some of these picks we got to start defending in a somewhat different way because we weren't keeping things under control in the first half.
Yep. And they, like, even this possession, the outcome isn't that bad. Like, it's not that bad. I don't think Chet made the best decision. I thought I would have drove the ball there, but this is the big one here. Like, yeah. Anyway, you could just let it play in. You know what I realized, because I've been doing film breakdowns of different things. Like, I just this past on Saturday, I did a rewatch of the Raptors championship defense. God, they're fun to watch. But also a lot of their rotations have kind of been solved by NBA offenses by now. But you're so much better at commentating live film than I am. Like, this is a real talent of yours. You're very good at it. So I'll let you
In
take
what
over.
way?
I think you convey the information in a timely fashion. I think you accurately identify all of the advantages on the floor. You don't use filler words really. You describe it, I think, like very efficiently. This is just me like looking back at what I do, and I'm like, man, Caitlin does this much better than I do.
Well,
That was what I learned.
I take that. That's very nice. Thank you for that compliment. Okay, so this is the ball screen. This is the stuff that Samson and I pointed out, which we tried to give as many explanations as we could. We had it both in film, and Samson also was nice enough to draw it on the whiteboard so that we could explain it. But the coverage from the Pacers in game 1 and here is if Shea or Jalen Williams was coming off downhill off a pick on the right side of the floor, the Pacers are sinking with that next nearest defender, the next nearest gap, to the nail as much as they could. Typically, it's called a next if they're actually jump switching onto the ball with the on-ball defender that's in rear view pursuit, then peeling off to the player at the wing. So just in these terms, Miles would be at the nail. He would absorb Jalen Williams. He would jump switch onto the ball, and Aaron would then peel off to Chet Holmgren. Here's what happened in real time when Miles was helping off, which before I do roll the film completely, I will say something that I said, well, a way that they could potentially counter for this is toying with who the player for the Thunder in the next nearest gap is, because obviously it's going to be more difficult for Miles to be sliding in and out above the break than what was the case when we showed like the perfect possession between Andrew Nembhard and Aaron Nesmith. But as soon as Miles is over there and he's going to jump switch onto the ball, it's really imperative that when the ball breaks the 3-point line that Aaron needs to peel over to Chet Holmgren. Otherwise, you're going to run out of rotations to make. So Andrew has to come up from the corner. You can see Pascal is really in a dilemma here. He doesn't want to take a hand off of the player that he's guarding in order to rotate out to the corner, although that's what rotation needed to be made because there was none other to make at that point in time. But that's not really, in my opinion, which I'll let you share yours. In my opinion, the breakdown happened because Aaron needs to peel into the passing lane. 100%. Not so much because Pascal's in the paint. But I'll run that back one more time so people can see it. Aaron needs to be behind the ball and peeling off so that if that pass happens, this is why like the Thunder had the lowest amount of passes per 100 possessions in game 1. That wasn't completely a coincidence, nor was the fact that Shea had his third average touch time per touch in game 1 either. This isn't executed with the same amount of precision.
Yep. And just to make this point, if you can just go back just like a little bit, the reason why it's so imperative for Aaron, outside of just like executing the scheme, is that keeps Nembhard on Shea. And that means that if Chet is going to be run off the line, like one, you can have a contested Chet 3, which is what the Pacers probably want as an outcome. Like Chet started the game well. He hit a couple jumpers, but I'm perfectly okay with that going forward. And if Chet is being run off the line, you still get to maintain Turner and Siakam like packing the paint. That's why this defense that's what this is trying to achieve. And when Nesmith doesn't do that, it creates a breakdown where you're creating these long rotations, this, 2 versus 1 situation that includes the ball in the MVP's hands, and you have scrambled rotations everywhere else. So it just execution has to be better, but credit to the Thunder for, I guess, playing around with the idea of like, well, now Turner is going to be in that situation. Right. And Nesmith maybe sees Turner low and is like, I don't know, maybe he's like, I'm in chase right now. It just is what it is.
Yeah, because I don't think ideally you want to have to help off Shea in a possession. But
Yeah.
the Thunder also, when Shea was in the corner, they were automatically baking in to attack that nail help again. If he's coming off the zoom action into a pin down in the middle of a handoff is effectively what zoom is. TJ's sinking at the nail. They're pairing it with a 45 cut.
Yep.
So Tyrese is being screened by Caruso there, and now Tyrese is having to defend two people at once. And while the Thunder didn't make this shot, that's different than when it was more stagnant, stationary offense around what the nexting was and what the exaggerated nail help was for the Pacers as well. And then, like, just as another example, another really high ball screen for Shea. The Pacers ended up just switching this and then switching it again until he gets Thomas Bryant, which obviously is not ideal. Siakam sinking heavily at the nail here. It's a big ask for Thomas Bryant in space, but he has to funnel Shea Gilgeous-Alexander into the help. You can't allow him to get downhill with his dominant right hand in that situation, because if I run this one back and you pay attention to what happens after that switch happens up
Mm-hmm.
top, watch Alex Caruso as the switch is occurring when he knows, okay, Siakam's shifting that heavily to the nail. He times it up with a cut. So now when Shea gets into the teeth, even if Siakam's not the most alert here, let's be honest,
Yeah.
this isn't the most twitchy defensive possession, but even if it was, there's nobody in the corner to then rotate up. Like typically when you do a next, it's coming from the two side of the floor when the wing and the corner are both filled, so that you're going to have help behind that
Yep.
player, or so that you still have somebody in the corner when that person does peel off. There's nothing, again, you're running out of rotations to make here, in part because of how the Thunder manipulated the coverage, but also because the execution from the Pacers just it isn't good enough. And like I said, while it's a really big ask for Thomas Bryant here, like you got to get clear up on that right hand to be shoving him into Siakam, even at the risk of fouling, rather than letting him get to his strong hand right past you, because it's putting the defense in way too precarious of a position.
Yep. That's just like that encapsulates exactly what it's. Well sequenced cutting, attacking the right thing, a failure by the Pacers a couple times on the same possession. And there you have it. Bob's your uncle. Becky's your aunt.
The
I
other thing
actually
that
have an Uncle Bob, by the way. And an Aunt Becky.
that's really funny. I do not have an aunt and uncle by those two particular names. The other thing that I noticed that stood out to me is that sometimes even when Shea wasn't on ball and it was Jalen Williams running the pick and roll from that same side on the floor, is that Shea was lifting Andrew as high up the court as he could. So like this is similar to what the Pacers do sometimes with Tyrese, in that Tyrese will literally stand on the logo when he's being face guarded to provide as much possible space for his teammates as he can. In this case, to me, before I run the film, I will just ask you, like, what ideally, if you're the Pacers, would you want Andrew doing here when he's guarding Shea and when you know that the player's coming off the pick and roll right beside him when the action is lifted this much higher up the court?
I think I would want him to be able to, since Shea is so high up the court, I want Andrew to be able to like sink and show a body, but also so that he can recover out if there's a reset and create that point of contact if they were to go into like a screening action with Chet afterwards and Shea. It's probably me looking at this what I'd want.
So you
But
would lean towards Andrew sinking rather than hugging up on Shea.
I think probably, yeah.
That's where I would be as well, because otherwise, like, he's hopping back towards Shea away from the nail. Aaron can't get back in front, and then it's just, and some of that's because Obi's the screener defender, to be frank. Like, I don't have a softer way of putting that than that. But you can see the difference here, and what ended up happening is this is where you have to be somewhat choosy, because this is somewhat at odds with what the Pacers have been attempting to do defensively. Andrew is lower on the court there. He's obviously taking steps off away from Shea. Shea, league MVP, but he isn't going to be, Damian Lillard and Steph Curry bombing from the logo. So I do think I agree with you. That's the way that I would rather see the shell of the defense look if this is what actions the Thunder are going to run. That being said, the Pacers have been very aggressive with Siakam in the regular season matchups and in the playoff matchups, that if he's guarding Caruso or he's guarding Dort, that he's helping off. It can't be both of them helping off. Like, it can't be Andrew sinking to the nail and Siakam having one foot in the paint. Otherwise, another smart thing by the Thunder It's like, oh, well, you're going to go ahead and sink. Well, then we'll just fire the ball basically into a stampede action behind the pick and roll directly to Shea, and Caruso being like, now we're going to punish you for sagging off of me, because now you're going to be late to the point of the screen because I'm going to go screen for Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. And now it's another person getting all the way to the hoop for a layup. So that's where you're going to have to make the choice. Like, either it's going to be universal that Siakam's helping off of Caruso, and then Andrew does need to be up higher to potentially influence the ball against Shea, or it needs to be a read from Siakam and know, like, hey, Andrew doesn't actually need to be that close to Shea when he's standing that far out. I can take 1 or 2 steps closer to Caruso in case they're going to link these actions together, because it's exactly what word you've been using is perfect, I think. It's the sequencing of everything the Thunder were doing, and they were prepared for, okay, we just saw Andrew. He was really high to Shea. That allowed J-Dub to get all the way down to the paint and finish with his left hand. Now he's playing higher, and we know what to connect to that next. So these were some of the things, like, that's why I said I give the Thunder a lot of credit. They were prepared for what adjustments the Pacers made in game one. They came with a lot of counters for it, and hopefully the Pacers can do likewise when they look back at some of this and be like, hey, sometimes we were heavy-handed with the things that we did. Sometimes it was as simple as Aaron Nesmith needs to peel. It's as simple as we don't need Siakam and Andrew Nembhard to both collapse in those types of situations. Or it's Thomas Bryant, we really need you to funnel Shea in the opposite direction. But the Thunder are also putting them in a lot of difficult positions here as well.
Yeah, with that one too, I think it's just like, for example, Siakam maybe being a step closer to Caruso helps, but also, and maybe that helps him create like he's more aggressive at the point of attack, which maybe you force Shea to try and like split and cross over, which takes time. It's not a straight line. It means the Pacers can catch up in rotation to meet him. But also, like, Pascal almost got that one. The big problems are like the huge breakdowns. That one is like a nice, clever response from the Thunder, and they got a layup out of it. But Shea going up against Pascal, like body to body, is not a guarantee. And there's just, similar to the way like we've discussed games in the past, like shot making and performance swings structure a lot. And sometimes it's just the Pacers, it's just not good enough. Like, if you do this, you're going to get shellacked every time out. And sometimes it's a small thing that the Thunder have an MVP they take advantage of. And you just have to make peace sometimes with Shea being as good as he is. And maybe you don't make peace with 20 points from Caruso, but them's the breaks. Or 18 from Aaron Wiggins, who was awesome. He had a hell of a game.
And there's some things too where, like, to an extent, Siakam collapsing and helping off in certain situations based on what second side actions the Thunder were running was almost effectively acting the same as the Ram screen against Tyrese. It was making him later up to the top of the action. But I mean, I don't think that you can completely eliminate that. It just needs to be defensive playmaking and defensive reads. Sometimes we think about reads only existing on the offensive end of the floor, and sometimes you have to be able to adapt the scheme in the moment based on what your teammate's doing against Shea at the point of attack as well. But I think my broad takeaway from all of this is the Thunder are a very good basketball team. The Thunder made a lot of adjustments here. This is by far the toughest test that the Indiana Pacers have faced. That being said, as you mentioned, the Pacers are coming back to Indiana with this series tied 1-1, which is an accomplishment in and of itself. And I think that based on the things that we saw here, with a little bit more attention to detail, and that's absolutely what it's going to take, is pristine attention to detail, pristine execution, the Pacers can narrow the gap and not be facing, as I termed it, the constant uphill battle that they saw in this one, where the Thunder were keeping them off balance at both ends of the floor.
This is a pain, this conversation about reads, to talk to players about, to get them to divulge things I've been trying for years. It's a conversation I had with Precious, I remember a long time ago, where I was asking about, like, what makes you decide, like, corner crash versus 45? Like, what's triggering that? And he said, like, well, it's a read. And I'm like, yeah, like, what's motivating the read? And he's like, oh, because they assume you don't know, so they don't care. Like, players a lot of times will just discuss things in, like, made shots, effort, things like that. But the game is about reads. It really, really is. It makes the difference. I hope when people watch this, they realize that it isn't just like corner threes. It's like guys are moving, and it's not just guys moving and like they're intuitive movers, yes, but so much of this is structured in and baked in. Like I think people, it's like, well, cutting is like you see the numbers on your guy's back. It's like no, it's like 5 people have to be on a string on offense the same way they are on defense. It's these things move together in concert with one another, and so much of it relies on being well timed and well intentioned by what your teammates are doing. And the Thunder won that handily in game 2. And they come into this series with significant advantages in play style. We talked about it at the outset for the previews. Like, have the Pacers seen this defense? Have the Thunder seen this offense? What does that look like? The Thunder defense is pretty singular, and the Pacers have a lot to figure out. But they read at a 12th grade level in grade 8 or whatever it is.
And the word. Oh no, yeah.
Did you, when I was in school, it was called AR reading, like accelerated reading. And if you read a book, it was worth it. You'd have to take a test on the book, and it was worth a certain amount of points. And then you'd get points throughout the year.
Yeah.
And then you'd get to you'd get bubble gum or something.
I think that you got I think it was called like Hoosier reading or something. It was very similar.
Hoosier?
Yeah, I think.
Oh,
I think there was like a Hoosier reading medal or something if you had so many points. Like certain books were worth a certain amount of points and you had to go take the tests on them. Yeah. Similar.
My marathon medal is the biggest daggum thing I've ever. I was like truly, because I don't remember. I used to, anyway, I won't get into that. But man, reading, AR reading.
I have a really obnoxious medal story to tell. So as you know, on New Year's Eve, I host a strategy board game tournament that lasts the entire day. And I told the participants, I didn't get to do it this year because I was too sick, but I told the participants the last time, in which I literally purchased a trophy that I was confident that I was going to win and get to keep. This trophy has since been at my brother-in-law's house for 2 years now. I told us that we could each have a good luck charm or a talisman that we were going to bring. So it was in part to poke at my sister, because my brother-in-law was on a state championship football team. So he has a medal from this. And I was on a state championship academic team for interdisciplinary, in which I have a medal for this. So I told him ahead of time, like, you know what you're bringing, right? Like, bring the state championship medal. My sister has none of these things. She was valedictorian, but there's no valedictorian medal to bring to the table. But it all backfired in my face because I ended up getting second, despite the fact that I won more of those board games than anybody else. The point system did not work in my favor.
I was valedictorian. However, we're not gonna say how many people were in my class, but I was valedictorian.
I think there was probably like 90 in my sister's class. I don't know. It's not my school that the two of us went to isn't one of the bigger schools in Indiana.
90 kids is a lot stiffer competition than what I faced.
Now I need to know, what's your best medal? You're coming to the strategy board game tournament. What's your talisman?
Oh man, I think I would bring something funny. I don't even. It
has to be boastful, Samson. Like, it can't be something funny.
I would bring. I don't know. Like, I took a picture of it when I did it, but I scored 56 points in a game.
Oh, I know. I know.
The score sheet. I thought I scored. I was like, I bet I'm high 30s, and then we counted it afterwards, and I scored 56, and I was like, wow. I'd bring like a screenshot of that and be like, I'm like that.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I just want the listener to know that I knew this because Samson and I many years ago exchanged what our best games were. And he told me that stat line, and I told him that I once had a very close to a 2020 game where I nearly outscored the opposing team. And I asked him for details of the game, and to this day I still don't know basically any of the details of this game because he just will not divulge them. I don't know what the reason for that is.
I fouled, maybe this is the Shea Gilgeous-Alexander thing. I fouled out an opposing guard in the first half. They're very grabby, very reachy. So basically, to give background, if anybody cares. So you can see on my hand here, in the middle there's a big scar. I shoot much worse now because I have no feeling in this finger, and this is my shooting hand. I have nerve damage basically. And you'll hear Esfandiar Berhane will make fun of my free throws because when I shoot elsewhere on the floor, my body kind of takes over the muscle memory. But when I'm isolated at the free throw line, that phantom finger plays. I really struggle at shooting free throws now. And I had a game in high school before I got injured where I was 16 of 16 from the free throw line. It wasn't the 56-point game, but that, and I hit a floater to send it to overtime. And like it was a full court sprint down floater, and we ended up winning that game. And that was really fun. But that's a really prideful game for me as well. But yeah, I don't shoot as well anymore, unfortunately. It is what it
You
is.
finally divulged like a few of those details when you were in Mexico and we did the one podcast late. Otherwise, it took like 2 years for you to literally share like one thing about a basketball game.
Yeah. I like to talk about other things. Late stage, etc., etc. Yeah. That's where a lot of my conversations go. But yeah, it was cool to score that much in a game. Maybe I'd bring that little score sheet.
Especially given that I now know that there weren't that many fans to actually witness it either.
Yeah. It was in an opposing gym. So, although
How many
that
fans are
team,
in the opposing gyms?
man, at that one, not that many. But that same team that I scored 56 on, we played them in the playoffs later, and I think they hit 24 threes against us, and they beat us. It was the last game I ever played in high school, and they hit 24 threes. It was incredible.
Okay, well, you got anything else from this basketball game aside from my asides about strategy board game tournaments and medals and high school box scores?
Your 20 and 20 game. So you talked about C was the play run for Pascal. What play netted you the most points in your 2020 game?
None.
Offensive rebounds?
I was a very good rebounder in junior high and in high school. That was one of my top best skills. Hence why I made the comment when I was talking about Love and Basketball being my favorite basketball movie. Why, like, somebody should have been able to tell me how many rebounds I had. They would have had to count several, but like never happened. But no, there were several offensive rebounds, but it was mostly just like it. Literally, there was one huddle where my coach was just like, "Yeah, just give Caitlin the ball." So it was just like there was pull-up shots, there was post-ups, there was just like the team I was playing. Like this is not me being braggadocious, people. The team that I was playing was not very good. Like obviously, like if one human being almost nearly outscores another basketball team, and what was like, it wasn't even a full-length game, as I recall. Like I want to say that was like a 24-minute game, and I had like I think my team won 27-25, and I had 23. They weren't a very good team.
Who's your comp? Who do you play like?
Oh, I was a very weird player. I mean, I'm 5'6", and I liked playing out of the post a lot because I spent too much time watching Jermaine O'Neal footage. So that made not a lot of sense within a motion shuffle offense that we were running. I could step out and shoot some. I played every position 2 through 5, which was at times confusing for both my teammates and the rotations that my coaches would play. I didn't play any point guard. And that's probably why I have such an appreciation for Tyrese Haliburton, because I tend to have appreciation for players who do things that I never would have done. But I asked my dad this question one time, and he did coach, and his opinion was that like probably like a Charles Barkley type player, like bully drives, rebounds, could shoot. That is what he said. So
Round mound of rebound.
Yep.
That is awesome. Charles Barkley as your comp is not what I would have guessed, but that is. Yep. That's pretty good. I'm happy with that.
And your comp is, of course, Joe Ingles.
Oh, yeah. I got
Cameron Payne.
I got so upset. We played pickup, and a friend of a friend who I was cooking, by the way. Cooking, not like with slick little like bump, relocation threes and that kind of stuff. Like I was beating him on drives, ISO, bucket. And he was like, "You play like Joe Ingles." I was like, "Dude, shut the hell up." I was like, "How dare you?" You know what I mean?
Was it simply because you were left-handed and you perhaps took one step back 3 to the right?
Well, Joe Ingles also he hasn't shaved his head, but he's pretty bald, I think. I think I'm just like
So we're
a
just
white
making it's
guy.
kind of like when I said, like, why are we comparing Dyson Daniels to Josh Giddey other than the fact that he's Australian?
Right, right. I reckon. Yeah, exactly. But if you want to go a white guard, lefty guard, probably Goran Dragic. Especially since
I sense some disdain as you're saying that, like,
I
probably
don't like
Goran
I don't like
Dragic.
Dragic. I don't like Dragic very much. Not because of I know Raptors fans hate him, but it never bothered me, that stuff. But I just never liked his game that much. He's also more
You don't like lefty push pace guards?
well, no. He's also more ground bound than I was relative to competition. Of course, not relative to the two of us. He's got more oomph at the rim than I do.
I do remember there being a video of you at one point on the internet dunking a basketball. I think it was quite some time ago, but
I've not
I
dunked
do
since the
remember it because
pandemic.
it did catch my eye. We didn't know each other much then. I think it was when you were still living in Mexico, but we had podcasted once, and I was like, "Oh, okay then."
I don't know if I'll ever dunk again in my life. I
I
haven't
don't think
dunked
I
since
ever will. It hasn't happened yet. I don't think it's happening.
I haven't dunked since the pandemic, which is like, yeah. I also shaved my head after the pandemic. It's quite a marker of my life. I moved out of Mexico afterwards. I went to Mexico and then the pandemic happened and then I was back in Canada. I couldn't dunk anymore. I shaved my head bald and I was like, what's going on, man?
Hopefully, the Pacers can have somewhat of a reverse of those trends when they go back to Indiana.
Yeah. Hell yeah. I think that was a sufficient glory days. Although high school was not glory days for me. And I don't think it was glory days for you either. But it's nice to reminisce on basketball. Okay. Basketball. We talked about it. You're here, which means you enjoyed us enough to listen to us talk about X's and O's for like 55 minutes and then our own basketball careers relative to high school for however much longer. Thank you for tuning in with us. If you'd like to support us, you can do so at Patreon. Basketball She Wrote. Just type that in on Google. You will find it. It is how we are supported. It is how we make the money. And you can do so. You will support the best basketball writer in the world, the best basketball analyst in the world, Caitlin Cooper. And by proxy, me. Thanks for tuning in with us, everybody. And whether you got into this in the morning or at night, have a blessed day and goodbye. It was a bad snap.